Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this warm welcome. It feels wonderful to be here. I am thrilled to see so many people eager to join in dialogue about where we as a nation find ourselves in the stride toward freedom. And it seems particularly fitting that we would have this conversation today, the day after our nation paused its daily business to pay tribute to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his legacy. And it seems fitting that we would have this conversation the day after our nation's first Black president was sworn in for his second term. Now, I know much of the nation has already moved on, and President Obama's soaring rhetoric about the promise of America, life, liberty, justice, equality for all, has already been forgotten by many. And I know that many people in America will not think of Dr. King again until his holiday rolls around again next year. But I'd like for us to pause tonight and think more deeply about the meaning of Dr. King's life and his legacy and what it has to teach us about our nation's present. It seems particularly important for us to do that given that this year marks the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. 50 years have passed. 50 years have passed since King's voice soared over the Washington monuments, declaring his dream. I have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And yesterday, while I was watching President Obama's inaugural address, I heard echoes of King's speech, I have a dream. And when I turned off my television set, I spent a few minutes reflecting on the question, are all of us, truly welcome to share in this dream? The same dream that Dr. King dreamed? Most Americans, I'm sure, can recite portions of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech by heart. It's an extraordinary and very familiar speech. I've grown accustomed to hearing clips of his speech played over and over, recycled over and over on the radio every January. They are the favorite quotes, the favorite lines. And now that I have school-aged children, I see how King is explained to them in classrooms. When I was in elementary school, there was no Martin Luther King Day, no discussion of his heroism in classrooms. But when my children came home from school just the other day, they told me all they had learned in school about King's courage. He was the man who stood up to the bullies, the man who believed that children of all colors and walks of life ought to be able to hold hands and be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skins. He was willing to die so that all of us could now live his dream. And I find myself conflicted as I listen to my children parrot back to me what they've heard in school about this man who believed in kindness and forgiveness and justice and compassion for all. And I say, yes, all of that is untrue. All of that is true. But I feel uneasy. I know that something has been lost in the translation. And that sense of disorientation was crystallized for me recently when I read Vincent Harding's insightful book, Martin Luther King, The Inconvenient Hero. Dr. Harding was one of King's closest friends and advisors, marching with him countless times and living around the corner from King's family in Atlanta. Harding writes with some real sorrow, quote, "It appears as if the price for the first national holiday honoring a Black man is the development of a massive case of national amnesia concerning who that Black man really was. I would suggest that we Americans have chosen amnesia rather than continue King's painful, uncharted, and often disruptive struggle toward a more perfect union, end quote. It appears, he says, as if we are determined to hold our new hero captive to the powerful period of his life that culminated in the magnificent March on Washington in 1963, refusing to allow him to break out beyond the stunning eloquence of his "I have a dream" speech. Dr. Harding writes, quote, "We would like to forget that it was not the weaver of gentle, sunny dreams of freedom who was shot down on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee," end quote. He was, by 1968, a different, even more courageous man, a man ahead of his time. And I can see clearly now that on days like yesterday, we rarely honor the man who died. No, we honor that sunny, cheery version of him. We honor the man who gave the soaring speech about black and white school children, a man who dreamed an integrationist dream. But who was king 5 years later, in 1968? Who was that man killed on a motel balcony? The man who was marching with sanitation workers and demanding economic justice, not mere civil rights. The man who had come to believe, after the civil rights bills had already been passed, after the civil rights victories had already been won, that our biggest battles, the most important battles, still lie ahead, and that nothing short of a radical restructuring of our society held any hope for making the dream and promise of America a reality for all of its citizens. King explained to a reporter in 1967, quote, "For years I labored with the idea of reforming the existing institutions of the society, a little change here, a little change there. Now I feel quite differently. I think you've got to have a reconstruction of the entire society, a revolution of values." Frustrated by white resistance to addressing in any meaningful way decaying ghettos, failing schools, structural joblessness, and crippling poverty, King told his staff at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, quote, "The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against that injustice, not against the lives of their fellow citizens, but against the structures through which the society is refusing to lift the load of poverty." So what would King think of us today, of the world we have created in his absence? Would he believe that the nonviolent revolution had already been won, had even begun? The revolution of values that he prayed for? Would he, if he could see us today, believe that we now share his dream, that we are now traveling the road he was marching? 50 years later, have we caught up with King yet? Are we finally on the path that he was traveling in 1963, 1968? Back in 1969, while blood still stained the motel balcony where Dr. King was murdered, a poem was written honoring his life and reflecting on his death. The poem was written back when King had only just begun the process of being transformed in our collective consciousness from a troublesome, dangerous black figure to a national hero. It was written way back when the memory of King's assassination was still fresh, tears still spilling among those who loved him. Back then in 1969, the poet Carl Wendell Himes Jr. penned this poem reflecting on King's death. He wrote, "Now that he is safely dead, let us praise him. Build monuments to his glory. Sing hosannas to his name. Dead men make such convenient heroes. They cannot rise to challenge the images we would fashion from their lives. And besides, it is easier to build monuments than to build a better world. So now that he is safely dead, we, with eased consciences, will teach our children that he was a great man, knowing that the cause for which he lived is still a cause, and the